Welcome back to another episode of People of Product. My name is George Brooks, and on today's episode, I had the pleasure to talk to Justin Wieners. Justin is a senior product designer at Storyblocks. And if you haven't heard of Storyblocks, we've actually used it here at Crema and are a big fan of any tool that allows us to create faster. And they are the home of unlimited stock video, audio, and images built to help your business create more effective video. Now, Justin has been actually a part of the Kansas City design community for a long time, but as he joined Storyblocks, it was really fun to hear the structure of how they put their teams together and the value of a designer working hand in hand with the engineering team through their squads or through a partnership or at least through a relationship. And that's what I loved about talking with Justin, is that he had this desire to see not only that a designer understands what a developer will need to do or an engineer will need to do, because maybe they've spent some time to learn how to do engineering themselves, but also that they have a relationship that actually allows them to be effective working together. We got a chance to talk about learning and how we got into this space and how we grew, and really how the core principles of design are still true today in our products that we use and love. So I think you're going to love this conversation. Let's jump right in. Welcome back, everyone. Justin, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I'm really excited to have this conversation, but I'm going to throw it first to you. Why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself, your story, your background, and what you do every day?
Cool. Yeah. My name is Justin Wieners. I am a senior product designer at Storyblocks. Storyblocks is a video library for creators and marketers who need extra footage or music, sound effects for the stuff that they're making. And I'm a photography camera nerd. And so it kind of fits perfectly. I'm building stuff for people like me, which is really fun. And it helps you kind of get into the headspace of becoming the user, so it's been a good spot for me. I've been there for about a year now.
Tell me a little bit about how your teams are set up. So especially in an organization like that's definitely iterating on a product, but you have a pretty stable long-term product, has a good reputation in the market. We've used it here at Crema. So tell me a little bit more about what your team looks like to keep working on it.
Yeah. So we have 7 different designers on our design team, and we're all kind of split up into we focus on different areas of the company. So we have one designer on growth who works with the squad of engineers and product people on that. We have an designer on marketing who works with, marketing and social teams and that kind of thing, supporting them. And I work on a workflow team. So I'm with engineers and product people, and we're trying to solve workflow problems for our customers. Like, how can we speed up their searching for video? So we're working on a Premiere Pro plugin to kind of help cut out the middleman of that. And we work on a easy to use video editor so that if you don't know how to use Premiere Pro, you can kind of jump in and do it kind of in a fun, simple way. So it's all about finding the different area or the different steps of the process for video creators and meeting them there and solving those problems.
So you mentioned you're a part of a design team, but it sounds like your day-to-day is actually with your squad. Is that correct? So what does it look like? You said a squad of engineers. What might a squad size be, or kind of what are the roles across that team?
Yeah, it is. I think you're right. I probably do spend more time with my squad than I do the design team. The design team, we have weekly check-ins where we kind of walk each other through the projects we're working on, and so we can kind of stay connected. But I spend most of my time with a group of about 5 engineers and 1 product manager. And so we kind of have the triad model of product designer, lead engineer, product manager, and we're kind of working on what's next and how are we going to approach these projects, how are we going to build them, how are we going to design them. And then we have 3 or 4 other engineers that are kind of more tactical, picking up Jiras, knocking tasks out and stuff. So that's kind of how that squad works. I think it's 6 or 7 people.
Now, if I'm right, you've told me that you actually did some engineering. You actually did some coding before you went full on designer, which at least in my experience, it tends to go the opposite direction most of the time. I mean, my first employee was a designer because we were first a design agency before we kind of became a full product consultancy. But very quickly he was like, "Oh, I can build these things," and so he ended up going towards the development route. But as I understand, you went the opposite. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so it's interesting. It's not necessarily that it was the opposite, but it's like they both happened at the same time for me.
Oh, okay.
So I went to school hoping to work in like advertising design or maybe advertising copywriting, but my like digital was like everything. And so my first job was actually building marketing websites, and this team actually like designed them and coded them. And so
Mm-hmm.
I didn't really like invest any time in code while I was in school, like I think the dream for everyone is like doing magazine design or something. So basically I had 1 week in between graduation and starting this job, and I went to Barnes and Noble and I bought a HTML book and kind of like learned the basics of how to code and like made some really really bad prototypes. And then I had like a really good team in that first job who like were super supportive and kind of taught me along the way. And but that was really foundational for I think my career and just learning how things are built, how things are put together, what are the ingredients, and how do you speak that language. So I still like 12 years later lean really heavy on that and like those connections and those relationships with engineers. Because once you like you really need to build trust with your team, because like as a designer I can't do anything unless the engineers are there to like help me implement this in the way that we want. um,
I love that. Our stories are very similar, actually. So my background was in graphic design, but I was definitely into computers early on. And it sounds like I was around before computers. I wasn't. They were totally around. But like you said, graphic design was a print. I mean, most of it was print, was collateral work, right? Because that's where advertising kind of really the basics of it were
yeah,
established. And that's where the money was if you wanted to get in that space. But this is the dawn of like early websites. I was building websites for all my friends' bands. And then it became this like, oh,
cool.
I could I could do this professionally, and I got a job at a tiny little agency that I was doing their websites, and I was both designing them and writing the HTML. Although to be fair, back then I was like literally doing like table-based layouts using
Yeah,
like Dreamweaver, I think was Adobe Macromedia Dreamweaver probably before Adobe. But it taught me, like you said, it taught me the conventions of what was possible, or how the browser works, right?
yeah,
Understanding how things float, how things stack on each other, how you can layer elements, and of course that only became more useful when we started building larger scale applications to go, I'm not going to design that because that's not, I mean,
yeah,
yes, it is feasibly possible, but it's not
that's not how it
viable.
works. Yeah.
Right, exactly. I'm curious then, when you go in, so let's say your team, I guess you could use, well, I don't want to use the Premiere example, but say you're doing that online editor, right? You're coming in and you're saying, okay, I know that there are a certain set of constraints within the way that I can approach this problem at hand, right? This design change or this new feature or this new addition. How does that look? How does your team come together, or plan what they ought to do first? How you approach this, research it, design it. What does that look like so that you can make sure that you're moving forward, considering the engineers in mind, but maybe not going like, "Hey, start building this, and I'll just sit next to you and we'll design and build it
Yeah.
together." What's that process look like?
Cool. Yeah. So, like an example that happened in the last 6 months is, so we work with a lot of marketing teams, and the way that marketing teams are set up is you have like some producers who are like creating the content or that type of thing, and then you have other people who are just kind of like stakeholders and aren't necessarily as like creative minded or like into the weeds. And so we wanted to set up like basically like brand standards for a
Hmm.
marketing team in our video editor, so
Yeah.
that someone who was like good at setting up colors and fonts and font sizes and that kind of thing could go in, set it up, and then share it with their team so that then the rest of them can get in and like there's consistency with all of the content they're creating.
Right.
And so like I think as a company, we kind of knew like this is a thing, this is our audience, and this is how they work. And so as a product team, we have what's called like a weekly brain trust meeting, and it's a product people, it's our lead engineer, data analyst, and researcher. And so like that's kind of the group where like early on a lot of things are happening and like figuring out what problems we're going to try to solve and like how we think we're going to do it. And then the design team, we kind of have this routine of like a 30%, 60%, 90%. And so like that's like fidelity or completion. And so I'll go in and start like a 30%, version of how can we solve this problem. And then like that's when you start learning a lot about what's going to work, what's not going to work. That's when we'll start doing some different preference tests with customers and seeing like what's really, clicking with people. So early on, it's a lot of just like product research, design, bouncing back and forth. But we always have that engineer in the room, because that's a good that's a perspective we need. Because if something is super wonderful, for our customers, but it's also impossible or too expensive to build, like we can't do that. We got to kind of meet somewhere in the middle.
It's interesting. I was on a design review today, which I'm not normally in as much as I used to be. And actually I'll admit I miss it. I was kind of like, can I join? And we were reviewing, it was a simple data grid of information, but it was beautiful. And we had added these filters to the data grid. And again, they were beautiful. But I remember seeing the engineer, or like kind of just, we were on a Zoom call. So I saw this engineer, and as we were talking through it, you could kind of see him like, And so I said, hey, engineer, what's your take? You obviously you've been around UX, you're in the front end engineer for a long time. He's like, yeah, I mean, I think that's possible. There may be an easier, simpler way. And then it became this conversation where we still wanted it to be beautiful, because the risk is you go, oh, well, the engineer's going to take it and they're going to just go make it functional, but is it going to be beautiful and wonderful? And this person was like, absolutely. Like they understood where we were coming from a design team perspective. They understood the value of the UX and the consistent style that we had across this application that we're working on. But I knew I could see that it was like, you've got an idea. And maybe you're just waiting. A lot of times we see engineers are just waiting for somebody to hand them the designs. Like, just tell me what you want to build. Like, give me the designs when they're finished, when they've been approved, when they've been tested. If you can give me the Zeppelin file so that I know all the code, whatever you're using, I'll just plug it in and I'll make it work. But when you get that collaboration and there's a conversation, I think it becomes really powerful, right?
Yeah. I think what's cool is like, as a designer, I've kind of found that there's usually way more than one way to solve a problem, And so like the way that I would do it, it could solve my problems, but my team also has different priorities. Like the product manager is trying to solve for something that is going to be, good for the business. And the engineers are trying to solve it in a way that is efficient and, like performs well. And so the best case for me is not necessarily efficient, because I'm going to design something that's super, super awesome and like incredible, but that's not realistic. And so like, what's cool is like, there's a solution somewhere in the middle, and that is usually the right one. And that's where we can all like, everyone can solve their own problem. And so it's almost like more of a challenge, like not necessarily how can we solve this customer problem, but how can we also solve it in a way that's good for the business? And how can we solve it in a way that's efficient and like can be built in a responsible way? And so it's almost like a second level of problem solving. How can you hit that perfect middle ground?